Welcome to the Long COVID podcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Long COVID podcast. I am delighted to welcome my guest today, Dan Neuffer, who is an ME/CFS and fibromyalgia recovery coach, as well as the founder of ANS Rewire, which has been mentioned by some of my previous guests. So today we are going to dive a little bit deeper into what this is all about and how it could help in long COVID recovery. So a very warm welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Jackie. It's my pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited to dive into this. Would you mind just saying just about yourself and what you do before we dive into more?
Okay, so story, if I make it very succinct, is I was ill myself for about 6.5, 7 years with, I guess I didn't accept ME/CFS diagnosis, but when I eventually did, I suppose that was sort of my primary thing that I connected with, and everything else was just seemed an extension of that. So when I started to get the pain and fibromyalgia and when I started to get POTS, it was just like another symptom. I didn't think of it as another illness really. And similar story to most people, went around, tried everything that I could find, gave up, got more sick in my case until I got very extremely ill, where I suddenly thought that living with the illness as best as I could no longer seemed an option. And in a moment of desperation, I suppose, I had this harebrained idea that I would determine what causes the illness, because I didn't like doing treatments. I tried so many treatments and it didn't make sense to me. My background was in science and physics, engineering, and I found the medical approach to be both mainstream and alternative medicine illogical. Someone says you have, an imbalance, let's fix it by doing this, or you have a hormone deficiency, let's give you more hormone. And, and it's like, well, but why? Like, why would you fix it? It's like if your car's broken or there's no oil in the engine, you don't just go, there's no oil in the engine, I'll put oil in it. Like, it's illogical. And of course, no one seemed to have the answer of what causes the illness. Everything is a mystery. And to be honest, it was just a bit of desperation. But my wife looked at me and said, yes, I think you will. So anyway, when I got a little bit better, got out of bed again, I started to do a lot of research, started going to medical libraries and so on and so on. Cut a long story short, I formed a hypothesis for the pathogenesis of the illness. I felt extremely confident that this was correct because it explained how people get ill, explained all the symptoms. And it kind of suggested a pathway for recovery, which I started to undertake with probably zero confidence. Not zero confidence, but I was 100% confident that the explanation was right, but I just couldn't imagine myself really being well again after so many years. I did make some progress. I had setbacks. Eventually I got well. It took me about 1.5 years. And then I decided to write a book. The primary purpose of the book was to share my hypothesis, as I put it then. I didn't realize that other people had come up with similar ideas going back to the 70s. It was like reinventing the wheel. Maybe some distinctions or a little bit different, but in essence. But then I published this book and I started doing advocacy work where I started to share recovery interviews, because suddenly I found all these other people who'd recovered in all manner of ways. And I wanted to break down this myth that recovery wasn't possible, because I guess that's part of the reason why I felt so hopeless. And I didn't like the stories where people said, "Oh, yeah, you this and you did this treatment," and because I tried all these treatment that other people tried, they never worked for me. And because they said, "Oh, you have candida, that's why you're so sick." Like it's not CFS, and I'm like, okay. And none of these things ever worked, right? But I started to share stories with the view of really going into a lot of depth. And of course, every recovery story that I share or that you come across, in essence, makes sense based on the explanation that I offer. And so that, of course, I thought it's a confidence-provoking thing, hopefully, for people. So I did that advocacy work. I helped people in my spare time to coach them. I found it had, to be frank, limited effectiveness. There's a lot to understand, and you're talking to someone even regularly for an hour, it doesn't necessarily translate into the actions and changes that are required. People kept asking me for my help. They kept asking me to do like something more in depth, an education program. And then a couple of years later, I was contacted by one of the top researchers in the world, who'd been giving a presentation for fibromyalgia on the pathogenesis of it, explaining how it works and what's the underlying cause, how that mechanism works. And someone in the audience piped up and said, "Oh, you sound like you're saying what Dan Neuffer says." And they were like, "Who's Dan Neuffer?" Obviously, I'm not in the research space. I'm not a medical researcher. I'm not a medical scientist. I'm not a doctor. And so then that sort of led to sort of them contacting me. And then I ended up creating this program. And that was then released in 2016. It's called the ANS Rewire program, which is an education and training program. Many people compare it to brain training programs because it has brain training elements, but it is actually a multilateral recovery program. And we need to understand how the illness works to understand why all the different strategies matter and why there is no cure. I mean, not that there's a cure for many other illnesses. There are not really cures in medicine, not many, maybe, I don't know, a handful if you're lucky. And that could be argued. But like people think this is how the world works for some reason. I don't know where this myth has come from. But we need to understand that we need to tailor our approach, and we need to focus on the root mechanisms of the illness as opposed to just treating the dysfunctions, of which there are many. And that's what the ANS Rewire program aims to educate and support people in doing. And I always say to people, you haven't done the Dan Neuffer ANS Rewire program. If you've done it, I'd say you've done the Jackie Baxter ANS Rewire program, right? Because everyone's experience of the program and what they need to do to recover is different. And how that can be, even though it's one illness with one pathogenesis, is something that is a little difficult to understand. And it's, I suppose, one of the reasons why mainstream medicine hasn't had many answers for this group of illnesses, which I consider to be one illness, not just because of my own personal experience, but because of the pathogenesis of these conditions.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, that's certainly been anecdotally what I've noticed is that, people who have recovered, there have been commonalities for sure, but everyone's route has looked different because every person is different and everyone's kind of iteration of the same illness looks different. So I guess, yeah, do you help people with long COVID? We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about long COVID breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you long COVID breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us.
Okay, that's a good question. So what I can say is that people who identify as having long COVID and people who have been diagnosed by long COVID have gone in the program and been helped by it. I guess I have never spoken about this term long COVID because that's a strange word. And I guess I kind of think ideally when it comes to health and medicine, one should be science-based as opposed to using strange words. And long COVID is like, I really don't like that word. What does that mean? It's like, it kind of suggests that people have COVID. So are we saying that these people have COVID still? 2 years later, 3 years later, oh, you got long COVID, so you still have COVID, an infection. That's what long COVID sounds like. I know that some medical authorities have made such suggestions. I'm not aware if there is the scientific evidence to back that up. If there is, then we should focus on treating the virus. And if there isn't, then we shouldn't say such things. That would be my point. What I would say is, if we're just saying we're using the term long COVID for somebody who's ill after they've had COVID, that again is the most ridiculous, unscientific, non-medical notion. And I just don't understand why people would do that. I've never seen a physician in the emergency department saying, yeah, we've got 3 surgeries going right now. What's wrong with them? Well, they all have long car accident. No, one person has a ruptured spleen. The other one has a collapsing lung. The other one has got organ damage and a broken leg. You know, this is what's called a diagnosis. You don't just go long car accident. I think it's a very, very odd. People becoming ill following viral infections is obviously not new. If that is what somebody has, then we might call that post-viral fatigue syndrome. That's what it's always been called. And I would not make a distinction between post-viral fatigue syndrome and ME/CFS or fibromyalgia or POTS. To me, this is one illness with one pathogenesis and one pathophysiology. That is not to say, I'm not suggesting that every single person who experiences symptoms after COVID simply has post-viral fatigue syndrome, because I'm not sure there's any science to definitively back up making such a statement. Whilst we see cases always different with ME/CFS, there's a lot of commonalities, you see a lot of patterns. I think it might be fair to say, and again, I'm not an expert on non-COVID. In general, I would say that I have had the sense that there are some things sometimes that are different with people having illness post-COVID as with other post-viral illness that we've seen, like with the flus or nondescript infections, let's say. And what is behind that? Well, I can't say. But it may be a case that these people actually do have post-viral fatigue syndrome and they have some additional pathogenesis. What does that mean for their recovery? Does it mean they can recover, they can't recover? Again, like, where's the evidence? You know, where's the actual evidence that means you can't recover? And if we don't even fully understand what those mechanisms are, it's difficult. What unfortunately happens, though, is that when we turn medical science onto a problem like this, it often gets too focused a spotlight. And this is part of the problem that unnecessarily mystifies illnesses. So if I just step away from long COVID in a moment, because this gets complicated, if I talk about ME/CFS, let's say, then, oh, well, we have researchers and we look at it and we go, well, what do we know? What can we see? And the problem is that depending on where somebody is in the progression of the illness and what day you catch them on, you're going to have a different assessment. Let's say I want to look at just real basic things, like let's say I want to look at the catecholamines. Let's say the cortisol output over a 24-hour period. Well, I can say, look at some patients, go, well, look, that looks normal. And then I look at the next patient and go, well, wow, that's like flat in the morning. And then I look at the next patient and go, well, that's flat in the morning, but at 10 p.m. it went through the roof to a place where we can't even measure it. It's so high. And then I take the same patient and I look at it the next day and I see something different. And I think if you look at that, you can perhaps see, oh, that's just all a bit too hard. And that's basically what's happened. It's too hard. That's why it's fallen aside. If I've got Addison's disease, it's very clear. Oh, look, I measured the cortisol. There is none. I measure your aldosterone. It's like, look at this. Like, this person's clearly got no adrenal glands. They've got Addison's disease. Or if I get Cushing's, it's much simpler. Or, type 1 diabetes, or, any of these kind of diseases. Medicine's great at broken. It's terrible at dysfunctioning. And break the arm, cut the arm off, put the arm back on, medicine's good at this kind of thing. And if something is really broken, I mean, let's not mince words. You got Addison's disease. If you don't go to a doctor, you're just going to die. You go to a doctor and they give you a pill and you swallow it and it's like, you're good. I mean, this is like magic, right? But when we're dysfunctioning, well, how do you fix that? And really, we can't fix it. We can encourage the body to start functioning normally again, but we need to understand what's going on. We can't just go in and, ooh, this is what you should do. It's more complicated, especially given the variance, not just between patients and the symptoms. I mean, obviously, there's a huge amount of scientists and physicians who still say, well, fibromyalgia and CVS are different illnesses, and POTS is a different illness, and post-viral fatigue syndrome, multiple chemical sensitivity, and they look at all these things as being different. But I don't. I believe this is all one group of illness. Now, in the context of long COVID, I would suggest that I have seen many people who have been, like I said, say they got long COVID. From my point of view, they had post-viral fatigue syndrome, and I've seen them recover. And I think there are some people who have some other stuff going on, but I've seen those people make, recoveries too. What exactly is how everything works? I mean, we don't have answers to that. And I'm not even sure we need to have answers to that. I know that in Germany, there's a lot of blood washing going on, but this has been a discussion with ME/CFS for years, seeing the changes in our immune system. But this is not curing people, Some people feel better, some people don't. We're looking too low down in the problems. We're in the trenches, okay? That's, I think, the problem with a lot of this medical approach, is looking at treating symptoms, making symptoms go away, instead of saying, why are they there? And I'm not saying we shouldn't do treatments, because treatments can be very helpful. And then they can also help resolve the root underlying problem of the illness, yes? And that's, I guess, where ANS Rewire is different to brain training approaches, yes? Because in ANS Rewire, we speak about getting people to re-engage with medical help. And we explain why this is required, and why it's required for some people more than others, and why it looks completely different for everyone, right? But I would caution people about going into a fixing symptoms, biohacking, magic cure solution, because there have been others who've walked before you for many decades who are still ill.
We'll be right back. Hey there, I'm just jumping in for a second to see if you're enjoying this episode. If you're finding it useful, maybe you would consider sharing it somewhere, a friend, a group, or even on your Twitter feed. If everyone was able to share just once, we'd be able to get this information out to even more people who really, really need it. So please consider sharing somewhere if you possibly can. I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you so much. mean, you were talking about long COVID as a term, and there was someone I interviewed that said something along the lines of a diagnosis is only useful if it leads to a cure or a treatment pathway or something practically useful from it. And I think because, I mean, a lot of people do like long COVID because it makes them feel heard or for all sorts of reasons. But because it's such a huge umbrella term, it's like, well, that could mean so many different things within it. It could be anyone from organ damage to post viral fatigue to all sorts of other things that, as you say, maybe, it's useful as a term, maybe for some people for some reasons, but in terms of kind of getting help, it could maybe be more useful.
This is exactly why I kind of rejected this ME/CFS diagnosis in the beginning, because I'm like, that just sounds like, no, I mean, I've got a real illness, like I'm like sweating and I've got fevers and like my glands are like, I think I've got a virus or something, like I was fine and then I'm not fine. And I don't know, I'm not just fatigued, like, I got a whole bunch of other problems. Fatigue is just the smallest part. Well, not the smallest, obviously that grew over the time. So I was like what you're saying, like if that didn't seem helpful, it was just some mystery illness, and that's why I regrettably in hindsight distanced myself and kept trying to find a doctor who would find what virus I have. You know what I mean? Um, I guess you obviously would have noticed my irritation with the term. I feel for all these people. I mean, the pandemic there was so much fear mongering. Then, this on top of it, and then you're ill, and then there's all this additional level of fear. Like, getting ill is scary enough as it is when you don't know what it is, but then when it gets described like, and a term like long COVID, and it's also non-science based, and it's coming through, I just find it to be unhelpful, and I don't think doctors like it. I don't think it's particularly helpful for them. I mean, again, patients come to them and they want to help them, and it's like they don't have some magic pill that they can give them. I mean, if they did, they would write those scripts like crazy. So I feel bad for the doctors too, because I often feel doctors kind of can't do any right by anyone either. It's like people have unrealistic expectations. We all have this image of the world that, oh, you get something wrong, go to the doctor, and then they'll just fix it. And it's like, what illness does that happen with?
Yeah, and it's almost like because there's so much within long COVID. I mean, certainly my experience has been that I've kind of needed to sort of unpick it a bit to try and work out some of those things that were actually wrong. Because, like you say, I have long COVID. Well, there isn't a cure for that. So, what do? I, kind of look at what that involves, and kind of discovering dysautonomia. That was quite a big thing for me because there is stuff we know about that, for example, and kind of then being able to work out what that meant in some form, but you wouldn't get that from, I suppose, the term long COVID. So yeah, I'd never really thought about it before.
You wouldn't get that from the term
No,
MECFS.
no.
Now, obviously, that is what I'm saying, dysautonomia, but people don't even say that about fibromyalgia. There's even like researchers who would not say that, right? Supposed experts. And I suppose in the beginning I was like talking about the hypothesis, and I think, goodness, that ship sailed now, from my point of view anyway. And some people will strongly disagree, and it's like, okay, just look at the evidence is what I say. But the problem is that there's so much. Like, if it was narrow dysautonomia, like when somebody suddenly developed POTS, everyone goes, they even call it dysautonomia, right? When people have POTS, because that's so obvious. But when you've got a million and one other things going on, which are real, right? The immune system, the problem, the changes in our bloods, the hormone level, there's so much going on. It then obscures it. And then people think, oh, maybe that's part of it. But you've got to look at a logical progression of how an illness works. And the other thing, just to call a long COVID because you had COVID and you were ill. I mean, like you said, if you have organ damage, it's different. I mean, I knew one person, she had long COVID, and she had the original Wuhan virus, which was pretty nasty, and she ended up like they wanted to amputate one of her lungs because she was still coughing up blood like 3-4 months later. And therefore you have long COVID. I mean, I don't know. That it's not the same, is it? So I think it's unhelpful. And I suppose, in summary, I don't know what long COVID is. I don't know if it's more complicated than post-viral fatigue syndrome. I would suggest in some cases it is, and in some cases it isn't. That's been my experience. And I would also suggest that even in the cases where it is more complicated, that this does not mean that you don't have post-viral fatigue syndrome. It does not mean that you cannot recover. And it doesn't mean those other symptoms won't also resolve. Now, I can't say categorically that that's absolutely what's going to happen, because nothing is certain with post-viral fatigue syndrome and any of these conditions. But there is no scientific determination to make such statements. And so we need to be very mindful about the determinations we make in ourselves, because our illness is scary enough as it is without overlaying such horrific narratives. You wouldn't do it to your child or your nephew or your niece. So it's inappropriate to do it to yourself. So if we don't know all the answers, let's not build the most horrific picture possible. That's my answer to people.
Yes, and it is something that we do, isn't it? I am 100% guilty of that as well. Sort of
Yeah, don't worry, I
catastrophizing.
was guilty of that too.
Yes, yeah, definitely. So I'd love to talk a little bit about what causes post-viral fatigue syndrome.
Okay, well, if you Google what causes post-viral fatigue syndrome, you're going to get as good an answer as if you Google what causes ME/CFS or what causes fibromyalgia. So officially, it's a big mystery. What I can tell you is what I propose is causing post-viral fatigue syndrome and this group of illness. The word cause has to be understood. So what I'm saying, what is the primary mechanism that causes these dysfunctions and symptoms to perpetuate? That's what I'm talking about. And what I'm saying is that it is dysautonomia that is the root driving mechanism that creates the dysfunctions and symptoms. And the dysautonomia is basically a dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system is the part of the nervous system that regulates everything. So it regulates your heartbeat, it regulates your digestion, or your hormones, your immune system, your skin, you name it, right? And really, I guess when I came to my conclusions, I was a little irritated at the time, because I'm thinking, well, surely if anybody were to come in to the doctor and say, oh, I've got problems with my guts and they're not working properly, and and then at night, sometimes I get so thirsty. It's like no matter how much I drink, and I get sweats at night, and then I'll get really exhausted, and then I get pain, and I got problem with sounds that make me upset, and the list just goes on and on and on. And I remember I used to be embarrassed to go to a doctor because I sounded like a hypochondriac. It's like, you've already had like 20 problems. Now I've got like another 5. Like, it's kind of embarrassing, You can't even bring yourself to say it because it kind of sounds so unlikely, let's say. You know what I mean? And like, when you see any kind of patient with that many symptoms, then surely it would seem obvious to me that either this person has dysautonomia or they're crazy and just making it all up, right? Because no one person can have so many different illnesses and symptoms. And unfortunately, it seems that even though the obvious one of the dysautonomia, that seems to be ignored. And instead, the second one often gets adopted, which is that you're making it up, or that you're crazy, or it's all in your head, or something like this. But yeah, I'm saying it's dysautonomia, and that is what's driving the symptoms. But a lot of the secondary dysfunctions that we then experience, and the symptoms, and lots of other things, stimuli that we experience in life, trigger the autonomic nervous system. Yeah. And that's normal. We always trigger the autonomic nervous system. But when the autonomic nervous system is in a state of dysfunction, then this triggering is excessive. And this is why we're ill. This is why I'm saying that people are experiencing illness.
Yeah, and I think, again, over my experience, it was understanding that there was kind of this one link between all of the stuff, and the stuff can look different for different people. And I think this was part of the confusion for me. It was like, well, I have this set of many symptoms and somebody else has this set of many symptoms, and there's a lot of crossover, but that person's got gut problems and I've got breathing problems, or so it was this kind of like,
That's right.
how can they all be related? And then when I realized that the autonomic nervous system was like, well, a thing, it was like, oh, so that controls kind of everything. So that's why all of these different things are affected, and why it's not always 100% the same in all these people, because everyone's different. Again, it's coming back to that again, isn't it? So it was a huge kind of moment for me when I understood that. So I guess the next question after that would be, how would one recover from that? And I guess a part of that would be, how can the program help people to do that?
It's my view that the most important thing here is to understand what's going on. Because without context, to persist with something is difficult. Unless you get immediate magic results, it's difficult to persist. And it is the understanding that allows us to customize our approach and maybe do some heavy lifting that we're disinclined to do. And so in essence, what I'm saying is, what we need to do is we need to do multiple things. We need to, first of all, reduce the triggering. And then we need to create an environment that will allow positive neuroplasticity to occur. So neuroplasticity is the ability for the nervous system to change and how it works. That's obviously the big step, is we need to retrain the nervous system to behave normally to stimulus, whether that stimulus be noise, smell, exercise, an infection, existing symptoms in the body, and blood sugar regulation. I mean, whatever, right? Heat, cold, all of these things. The key is not just in fixing dysfunctions. The key is in fixing the dysautonomia. And the addressing of the triggers and the dysfunctions in the body has to be in the right context. If we try and fix them to resolve them, that is a merry-go-round. I mean, people have been doing that for like 50 years. It doesn't get you anywhere. I mean, biohacking, as it's called, was probably invented by these people, right? The scariest thing for any doctor, because they seem to know more than most people who are biochemists, right? But like, these things can be helpful, but they need to be done for the right reason. That's what I would say. A lot of the brain training community basically doesn't like physical treatments because they see it as a contraindication to brain training. I give you an example, like for mainstream brain training, for chronic pain, for instance. I mean, it's old. I mean, still not being used really in mainstream medicine, but it's like very old, established science, right? And that is when people have a lot of pain, but there's no real need for the pain. Like there's no acute injury or anything. And the brain's basically learned to feel pain. You get this a lot with back pain. You get this from people who've had car accidents, all kinds of things, and they have pain for years, And then what we need to do is we need to treat the brain, re-educate the brain to start not to feel that pain, right? Now, some of that is done to manage the pain. It shouldn't be done to manage the pain. It should be done to get rid of the pain. Like I've been sending people to pain psychologists for over a decade now. They get there and they go, we're going to help you manage the pain. I'm like, don't manage the pain, get rid of it, right? So, everyone's trying to be careful not to over give expectations because they might not be able to meet them and all of this. Look, like, aim for the moon and fall short if I have to, but let's just try and get well, for goodness sake, and like, the science is really established. There's a reason why there's a field called pain psychology. It's not because the pain isn't real or it's imagined. The pain is absolute real. It's as real as me smacking you on the hand with a hammer, right? But the point is, we need to address that. Yeah, we need to address that. And and they don't like when you then talk about physical treatments, because if I start talking to you about what's wrong with your back, then your ability to engage in the techniques to retrain your brain is hindered. Yeah. Now, of course, they don't look at the science and the fact that the correlation between spinal abnormalities and spinal pain isn't all that strong. You get a whole bunch of people and scan all of their packs and go, oh, look, all these people got all these problems and they got no pain. All these people have got pain and they got no problems. And there's some people who've got problems and pain. Well, it must be the problems that are causing the pain, right? This is not logical. So I don't know why we still do this. I guess we do it because in some cases it's true. In some cases it's true. And so there's a difference between short-term and long-term, right? Like, none of this stuff is so black and white. When I've spoken to like pain research scientists, they have often said that all chronic pain is in the brain, full stop, right? Full stop. And I'm like, you know what? Somebody who's got severe SI joint dysfunction for the last 15 years and still has severe SI joint dysfunction, I would suggest it's not all in the brain. Call me old school. I'm going against the scientist here, okay? Right? Because when they then finally learn how to do the core exercises and resolve the SI joint dysfunction and start to feel less pain, well, how did that work, right? But to be fair, on the flip side, you might say, well, why do they still have such severe SI joint dysfunction? Why are they not engaging their back properly in the core and the muscles? And a lot of that has to do with the way the brain's behaving. So suddenly you can make more of an argument for it's all in the brain. But it's not that simple. It's not that black and white is what I'm saying. And so the challenge is there are huge benefits to physically treating our body, engaging with doctors, engaging with naturopaths, engaging with physical healing strategies, because there are even dietary strategies that directly impact your autonomic nervous system. And the challenge is doing that in a way that does not interfere with the ability for us to engage in the brain training. And I suppose, I think it would be fair to say that there is pros and cons to the different approaches. I've had a ton of people who tried all the brain training things in the world come into the program. They're like, now it makes sense. This is amazing. I'm doing this stuff and this physical strategy and that and this and that. And now I'm recovered. It really worked. But I can tell you, there are people who went into my program and did all of that and then just didn't have progress and went off and did a brain training program that would be just focused on just doing the brain training, who then had success. And the reason is because they couldn't manage this contraindication between the two opposing strategies. I try and help people. I try and teach it. It's not that easy, actually, But all of this, if you can't even have this conversation of what is this problem that you need to overcome, then what are your chances of overcoming it? Right? And so, my approach has been to go for a multilateral approach, as opposed to, and what most people are doing is either they go purely biological approach or purely brain training approach. And I personally believe that the two should work side by side. So that's a long-winded answer.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, and there does seem to be this kind of almost war between the sort of biomedical cohort and the what we might call maybe the mind body cohort.
Yes.
And I don't know if I am naive or just not involved in medicine and seeing it from a different standpoint, but I find this kind of opposition really strange because surely both are important, as you've just kind of said. You know, the mind impacts the body and the body impacts the mind. I think we know that. So surely we should have that in mind when we're looking at things that are going to help us.
Well, like, I don't like the term mind body that much,
Mm.
right? I mean, I'm talking about a neural training approach. And because mind body suggests there's something wrong with the mind. And if I fix the mind, then we're going to fix these problems in your body. It's like, hang on a sec, that's not, well, when I say that's not what's going on here, that might be going on for some people. Yes, I won't deny that because of the way that the autonomic nervous system works. For some people, that can actually be true. But I wouldn't say that this is what goes on for most people. Like if I have somebody who's got severe PTSD and depression and anxiety and ends up with CFS, fibromyalgia, post-viral fatigue, whatever, that resolving that would be absolutely key. But I mean, what about the rest of the people? So saying mind body, yeah. I mean, I coined one term that I'm pretty sure I invented, and that is a somatoneurological approach, right? And that is where you train the brain through your body. So it is one, yes, there is a mind nervous system connection, right? Mind nervous system body connection. There's also a body nervous system body connection, right? And there's more of a purely neurological body connection, right? And that's where you see people who have like especially triggered through their senses, whether that be the touch on the skin, they're triggered by cold, hot, smells, sound and light. In fact, I think it's one of the key telltales whether someone has this illness or not. And I mean, some people are even triggered by changes in barometric pressure. They're like some kind of weather forecasting system, right? They'll get a flare up. And that's more of a purely neurological thing. Because it's not a mind thing. They don't know that the weather's changing. It's a beautiful day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. And I think, I mean, again, we're probably going down a bit of a rabbit hole here, but I think possibly it's linked with medical gaslighting. There may be other reasons as well, but I think there can certainly be a way that people can think when you mention things like brain retraining and even just kind of the brain, where people will say, it's not in my head. And, you've said, this pain, this symptoms, they are very real. I mean, we all know
Of
they're real.
course.
We've all felt them, haven't we? It's like my heart is going insane. My breathing is not right. I'm not making that up. That is extremely obvious. If I was to, go for a medical exam right now, they would pick it all up.
Yes. And it is not anxiety. It feels like anxiety, and anxiety will arrive sooner or later. Or anxiety might even have precipitated, it will be part of the illness, but it isn't anxiety in its pure sense. It's a symptom.
So, yeah, how do we answer the it's not in my head question, I suppose?
Happy to speak to that. Look, first of all, you used the term gaslighting. If people were respected in the beginning and, oh my goodness, you really have these symptoms, there must be something wrong with you. Let's find out what it is. And then when it is found out, they're being told what it is. And with the understanding that this is a real physical illness with real physical symptoms, nobody would then, if we talk about brain training, have an issue and go, oh, you're saying it's all in my head? Nobody would do that. Why would you do that? I can tell you that does not happen to any stroke victims. I've never heard of some stroke victim going in and going to the physio where they're learning to walk again, going, crossing his arms, going, what? Are you saying it's all in my head? Have you ever seen that? No, because they were told, oh yeah, you had a stroke, you got damage and you can't walk properly and that's real. We know you can't, you're not just being lazy. when someone's had a stroke. No one goes, oh, you're being lazy. You don't want to talk, right? You're pretending to have your face hanging off to the side. No one does that, right? And then they go, okay, well, right, yeah, they've suffered an injury, and here's a process, and we have to teach the brain how to now do this, and we do the brain training with you, and never comes up. They never even heard of this it's all in your head concern. Now, obviously, I'm not suggesting that post-viral fatigue syndrome is the same as a stroke, because it's a different problem, but it is a problem of the brain, primarily, like a causal problem. Obviously, there's many more problems in the body. I think anyone has to recognize that it's multifactorial, but those things are resulting, yes, or self-perpetuating, and can resolve once the autonomic nervous system returns to normal functioning. And basically, I think, we need to just change how people are treated in the first place. And then we won't have this discussion anymore. I've seen people being accused of saying that they're saying it's all in their head. And when I've looked at it, they never said that. The issue is often not that somebody is saying it's all in your head. The issue is often that people are receiving it like that. And the reason is because they're primed. They're emotionally primed because they've had too many roll of the eyes, too much lack of understanding. And I got to just point out that before we get too judgmental and we feel like we're so badly done by, which we are, you got to recognize that you'd probably not be any different. And that is because we are not evolved to understand chronic illness. It's an unnatural condition. Have you ever seen an elk with type 2 diabetes? Have you seen a bear with chronic back pain limping through the woods for years? Like, this is unnatural. It doesn't happen in nature, chronic illness, right? If something happens, animals get over it or they die, and that's that. And in this artificial construct of humanity, where we live different to every other animal on earth, especially in modern society, I mean, even if you go back probably 50,000 years, probably didn't have chronic illness then, right? But these days, we have chronic illness and people just can't get it. They can't understand it. I remember I had this experience even with a back problem a few years ago. I can't walk. I can't get out of bed. I'm really in a bad way. And it's like, oh, okay. Oh, that's not good. Then 1 week later, hey, we're going like to the beach, and then we're going to like do this and this and this. You want to come? I'm like we cannot understand chronic illness. That's my view.
Yeah, I think this whole experience for me has been an eye opener in many, many ways. And I suppose, speaking kind of to what you've just said, it's very difficult for somebody to understand any experience, I suppose, unless they have some experience of it. So, I'm not saying that because I have had long COVID and, I'm now recovered, that I understand everything about your personal experience or about anybody else's. But I suppose it's that I have enough experience of it that I can at least understand on the same level. And I think that's the difference between someone who has and someone who hasn't had experience, I suppose, because even my partner and I have had this conversation quite a lot. And even though he has experienced it through me, through living with me and through seeing it every single day, he can understand probably more than a lot of other people, but he still doesn't understand because he hasn't had the actual experience of having it. And again, I suppose that was part of it being a bit of an eye opener, because I would have kind of considered before that I kind of understood my two friends who had ME. And now I'm thinking, oh, no, I didn't. I might have been empathetic, sympathetic, and hopefully understanding towards them as much as I could be. But there's no way I could have been, I understand your experience, because I suppose in some ways, if I had said that, that would have been actually quite patronizing to say so.
Look, I mean, patronizing, I mean, nobody has bad intentions. I mean, of course, my experience and that experience of thousands of people around the world maybe millions, is exactly what you say. Yeah, you cannot understand an experience unless you've been through it. Not you can get some insights, and like you say, partners often have a great insight into the struggles that you have, and they can empathize, but they cannot appreciate what goes on in your head and how terrifying it is, and how suddenly staying extra 10 minutes at the shops or having to drive home on your own is a problem. You know what I mean? Like, and what fears associated with that. They cannot understand that, right? And that's probably a good thing. I don't know if I want everyone to understand it. If we all understand it, we're in a difficult place. Maybe we need to learn to accept somewhere along the line that sometimes in life we just have to bear a burden on our own. Maybe that's always how it's been. And maybe we don't recognize that until we meet such a life-changing challenge. Yeah. I mean, people used to say to me when I used to do the recovery stories sometimes and talk to people who recovered, it was a spiritual journey, my recovery, and I often say that being a science background, and I was like looking at mitochondrial function and hormones and this and gut, and they're like, it's a spiritual journey. And I'm like, I would roll my eyes so hard, I almost injured myself. And yeah, now of course, that was just ignorance. Even after I've recovered, it's taken me many years more, and seeing so many hundreds of people's journeys that I finally understand and appreciate what they're talking about. And when you consider some of the things, for instance, that I ask people to do in a program for the brain training, you kind of understand it, because I mean, these are unnatural things to do. They're stupid, they're wacky, and without context and understanding education, they're just madness. Illogical, stupid madness. And until Dr. Mercenich came along, and finally, through the overwhelming evidence that he'd been accumulating and that was starting to be accumulated, managed to turn around the narrative that the brain was set at adulthood. In the beginning, he would do his research papers, and he would use language that was, politically correct, for lack of a better word. Like, the brain appears to have responded in a way that one may not have expected. He couldn't say, "Oh, I observed neuroplasticity," right? Because everyone said, "Well, there's no neuroplasticity. You can't have that once you're an adult." All right. And he had evidence, right? But even with the evidence, he was ridiculed, until eventually what happened? And then we got cochlear implants based on his findings. And so we know now the brain is not plastic, but people get very rigid in their beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely found keeping an open mind to what might and might not help has been helpful. And don't dismiss something just because it might not fit into your very specific worldview, because you're maybe entering a different world when you're experiencing something.
Well, I mean, what was I saying? Like, the whole thing about doing wacky things. If your great great grandfather, right, and he had a stroke, and he would have gone to a doctor, and the doctor would have said, "Oh, part of your brain has died, and you'll never be able to walk again, and there's nothing you can do." If I were to take him to the physio now and say, "Oh, just walk, take a step," and he's like, "But what are you talking about?" Yeah, we're going to teach your brain to walk again. You'll walk again. We've got patients all the time coming in. They can walk again. He'd be like, "I thought the brain is dead." And then go, no, look, watch, you do it. Just imagine your leg walking. All right, imagine moving your leg. And then the physio takes the leg, shuffles it along the ground. Because see, you took a step. I mean, can you imagine how you would have reacted? He would have gone like, what kind of an idiot do you think I am? I can see it was you who moved my leg. I can't move it. I tried to move it. It doesn't move. The doctor told me that my brain is dead. Impossible, right? And yet, now your grandfather would go and be told a completely different story, and he'd be shuffling along in there. holding on to the buzz, right? So having context in education is essential for us to be able to engage in brain training effectively. There's no way the first person would ever have followed through.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Because it's ridiculous, right? It's not ridiculous if you understand the science behind it, but it is ridiculous if you don't. That's why education is everything, in my view.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, that's just blown my mind a little bit.
I've had people go on my program and like a couple of weeks later say, "Oh, I'm cured, I'm this, I'm blah, blah." Like this, send me these emails. I get them every once in a while. And of course I know that's not true. It's kind of awkward, like I don't want to burst the bubble and go, well, I'm going to feeling progress and just keep going, and because they've had like a shift, they've experienced a shift, they've gotten an understanding and the whole way they're relating to everything. And it's like they have these incredible shifts sometimes. Not everyone, just some people. And it shows you the power of understanding, you know. Now I can promise you that none of those people after 8 days were cured. It's not happened, right? Okay. But obviously they felt something, right? They wouldn't just say that if they didn't feel a big shift in their body, at least for the time being, And I haven't done anything. They haven't done anything. All they've done is learn some stuff. I mean, it's not how many strategies can you do in 8 days? So education is key.
Is there anything else you want to say about the program itself? I think we touched on it quite a bit earlier.
Well, it gives you some idea what it's about. Look, I guess the thing to say is the program is for post-viral fatigue syndrome or ME/CFS, fibromyalgia. If people think that that's what they have, if that's what the doctors diagnose with them, or if they feel their illness matches those conditions, as long as they've been thoroughly checked out, we should always be checked out. We should never assume we have an illness because it could be something else, right? But they've been checked out a doctor who shrugs their shoulders and or says you have ME/CFS, post-viral fatigue syndrome, then it might be appropriate. It's not a magic cure, right? It's not a magic cure. And I think people should only do it if the whole premise of the program makes sense to them, if they believe that's right for what they're experiencing, because only then can they engage in it. So I actually discourage people coming to the website and buying the program. What I say is watch the first 4 lessons. So you learn what it is about, what's in the program, to see if that's the right fit for you. And I've had some people go, nope, I don't know about that. And then they come back 6 months later and go, yeah, I'm ready. And they do it. And that's great, So don't rush into anything. That would be my key things. In terms of what's in it and how it works, you can see that from those 3 lessons. And you've probably got some idea already from our chat today.
Sure, and I will make sure that a link to the free lessons and your website and there are some other things that you've sent me go into the show notes, so they'll hopefully be easy to access.
Absolutely. I guess my only parting comments is don't let people fill your head with fear and negative stories. It's a terrifying experience to have such a chronic illness, and the information that we get sometimes is correct but out of context, and it's difficult in this world to find a credible source of information. That's what I will say. It's difficult to find a credible source of information. At the end of the day, what really counts is, I say the proof is in the pudding, And so when people talk about these negative things, they go, is there scientific evidence that there's absolutely no way that you can recover, you can get better, that this is broken? Because, we think that life is about having solutions. And that is completely incorrect. If life was about having solutions, then we wouldn't have many problems. If life was about having solutions, then we wouldn't have pollution in the world. If life was about having solutions, then we wouldn't have people with obesity and lifestyle diseases, heart disease and type 2 diabetes. And I mean, I can just about get a kindergarten kid, 4 years old, to give you the solutions. to break through the medical mysteries and science. No, they can cut through all that in like 30 seconds as a 4-year-old, right? Okay, so the solutions are often not complicated. It's our ability to engage in solutions. So therefore, if it's all about what you're able to do, looking after your mindset is probably more important than finding the correct strategy. Because you can find a mediocre strategy that you can engage in and you can still progress. And you don't need to be 100%, you just need to progress. Because once you've progressed, you can have more progress. But if your mindset isn't right, you could find the miracle cure and couldn't use it. And I gotta tell you, there's very few of us who have a particularly strong, robust mindset when we undergo such a testing experience as this illness, and so we need to be gentle with ourselves and understanding and treat ourselves with compassion. I'm starting to sound more and more like those people who talk about their spiritual journey. But now I can see why we talk about that. So I guess that would be my closing message.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today and for giving up your time so late in the day for you as well. It's been absolutely fascinating diving into all of this, and I hope it will be useful for people listening as well. So thank you so much.
It was my pleasure, Jackie. Lovely to meet you.
Thank you so much to all of my guests and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch. I'd love to